I always thought my grandmother was poor until I found out she had $1 million. My grandmother used to say the same thing every time I offered to buy her something nice: "Save your money, dear. I've lived long enough without frills." She'd say it with that papery voice of hers, thin as the lace doilies she crocheted for every surface in her tiny apartment. She'd sit there, half swallowed by her ancient armchair, looking at me with pale, watery eyes that somehow always seemed to be apologizing for existing. I believed her. We all did. She had lived through war, famine, the collapse of an entire country. She wore the same wool coat for 20 years, patched at the elbows so many times I stopped counting. Her purse was older than my mother. She kept her TV on a wooden stand so rickety it looked like one good sneeze could take it down, but she refused every offer to replace it. And yet, when she died last winter, pneumonia, swift and quiet, like everything else about her, I was the one left to sort through her life. My mother couldn't bear to do it. She stood at the door to that musty little apartment, clutching her coat around her like armor, and said, "I can't, sweetie. Take what you want. Just burn the rest if you must." I didn't burn anything, obviously. I was too sentimental for that. I spent 2 weeks picking through the detritus of her 84 years, yellowed letters tied with twine, brittle newspaper clippings, a tin of buttons so old they'd rusted into a single lump. Her tiny wardrobe held 2 faded dresses and the black wool skirt she'd worn to my grandfather's funeral, and every funeral since. There was nothing of value. Or so I thought. On the last day, I found the suitcase. Of course, it had to be in the attic, that freezing crawlspace under the roof that smelled of dust and old mothballs. I don't even know why I pulled down the ladder and climbed up there, but grief does strange things to your sense of practicality. I think part of me hoped I'd find an old photo album, maybe a letter that said I loved you all more than I ever said, something gentle to close this sad little chapter. Instead, I found a battered green suitcase shoved behind a box of broken Christmas ornaments. I dragged it into the light, sat cross-legged on the dusty floorboards, and popped the latches. I was fully prepared to find it empty, or stuffed with old linens. My grandmother was not a woman of surprises. Except, apparently, she was. Inside, stacked in neat bundles tied with twine, were thick bricks of cash. Actual cash, all crisp 1,000-ruble notes. I just stared at it for a while, waiting for my brain to catch up. Then I did the only sensible thing: I laughed. Hysterically, alone in that cold attic, my breath fogging the air. I think some part of me thought it was fake. Monopoly money, maybe. A cruel prank played by the universe to remind me how little I knew about the woman who'd fed me pancakes every Sunday. It wasn't fake. I counted it. Twice. 1 million rubles. Give or take a few wrinkled notes. At the very bottom, nestled between 2 bundles, was an envelope. My name was written on the front in my grandmother's shaky, spidery hand, to Anya. I opened it, my fingers trembling so hard I nearly tore the paper. The letter inside was short. So short it almost made me angrier than the suitcase itself. "My dearest Anya," it read. "If you've found this, it means I'm gone. You are not to ask where this money came from. You are not to spend it. You are not to speak of it. Please forgive me. Love, Babushka." That was it. No explanation. No comforting words. No postscript saying "just kidding, spend it on something nice." Just that: don't ask. Don't spend. Don't speak. Of course, the first thing I did was speak. I called my mother. She didn't pick up, she was halfway to the dacha by then, burying her grief in gardening like she always did. So I called my best friend Katya instead. She listened in stunned silence while I sat on my grandmother's dusty attic floor, the suitcase open like a gaping wound beside me. "1 million, she said finally, when I ran out of words. "As in, actual million? Rubles?" "Yes," I said. "In cash." "And she said not to spend it." "Well, of course she did," Katya snorted. "She was the cheapest woman alive. Maybe she thought you'd waste it all on coffee and hair dye." "Katya, I'm serious. Why would she have that much money? She always said she was poor. She lived like she was poor. Maybe she didn't trust banks. Old people do weird things. Hide it under the mattress, bury it in the garden." My uncle found 3 jars of dollars in his grandmother's freezer. "Yeah, but $1 million? Where does a woman like her get that? There was a pause. Then Katia asked the question I hadn't let myself say out loud yet, what if it's not clean money? I looked at the bundles again, the crisp notes, the neat twine. It didn't look clean. It didn't look dirty either. It looked like it had been waiting. I don't know, I whispered. Are you going to keep it? Katia asked. I stared at the letter. Don't spend it. My grandmother's words, echoing like a curse. I don't know, I said again. I really didn't. So I left the suitcase in the attic that night, locked the hatch behind me, and drove home. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. The money. The letter. The woman I thought I knew. I thought I'd buried my grandmother last week. Turns out, I hadn't buried half of her at all. The suitcase wouldn't leave my head. I swear I could feel its weight pressed against my ribcage every time I breathed. I'd gone back to my apartment after talking to Uncle Misha, trying to act like a normal person with a normal dead grandmother and normal heirlooms, maybe a porcelain figurine or a stack of embroidered napkins. Not 1,000,000 rubles and a letter that felt more like a curse than a blessing. I sat at my kitchen table that night, the same cheap IKEA thing I'd been dragging from apartment to apartment since university. I made tea, just like Babushka would have, except I used 2 bags, like a decadent American, not her weak single bag she'd reuse until the water turned the color of dishwater. I sipped and stared at my phone. Katia had texted me 3 times that evening, so? Did you find out where it came from? Want me to come over? Seriously, Anya, you better not be sitting alone like a tragic movie character. She wasn't wrong. I was exactly that tragic movie character, the idiot who finds a briefcase full of cash and instead of booking a flight to Bali immediately, sits around drinking cold tea and overthinking her entire family history. I didn't answer her. I just kept picturing that letter. You are not to spend it. Why not? What was the point? If she didn't want me to spend it, why not burn it? Or bury it with her? Why leave me this heavy, rotting secret if I wasn't supposed to do anything with it? My rent was due in a week. I was behind on my credit card. My boss at the advertising agency had suggested I start looking for new clients because, you know, the economy, Anya, translation, we can't afford to keep paying you for your mediocre banner ads. And yet, just upstairs, 1,000,000 reasons not to care about any of that. I found myself scribbling numbers on the back of an old receipt. If I took just one bundle, one neat little brick of 10,000 rubles, I could cover rent for 2 months. No one would know. It wouldn't even make a dent. Babushka was dead. The note said not to spend it, sure, but surely she wouldn't want me to starve instead. Surely she didn't want me to get evicted while her secret gathered dust in an attic no one would ever visit again. I felt sick with the logic of it. That's the worst part. The temptation wasn't dramatic. It was ordinary, almost boring, like standing at the edge of a frozen pond and realizing how easy it would be to step onto the ice, just to see if it held. By midnight, I'd convinced myself to go back. I threw on my coat, pulled on boots over my pajamas, and drove back to her building. The streets were empty and slick with half-melted snow, the city half asleep under dirty streetlights. Climbing the stairs to her apartment felt like sneaking into a crime scene I'd made for myself. I let myself in, the stale air greeted me like an old slap. I didn't even bother turning on the lights this time. I knew exactly where I was going. I pulled down the attic ladder, my breath echoing in the hollow dark. The suitcase sat there like it hadn't moved at all, and why would it? Only I knew it was here. Only I had the key to this particular lockbox of guilt. I opened it. The bundles looked smaller than I remembered, somehow. Or maybe my hunger had grown larger. I reached for one, the twine rough under my fingers. 10,000. Enough to breathe easy for a few weeks. Enough to test whether this curse was real, or just an old woman's final attempt to keep control from the grave. But then I saw it again, the envelope. Still there, tucked between the stacks like a silent judge. I pulled it out, hoping maybe I'd missed something the first time. Some hidden postscript. A blessing. Spend wisely, my darling. Forgive my drama. But there was nothing. Just her words, don't ask. Don't spend. Don't speak. I almost laughed. The woman could barely afford fresh bread, but she could afford to haunt me from the other side with riddles. I put the bundle back. Closed the suitcase. Sat there in the dark, hugging my knees like a child. I don't know how long I stayed. Long enough for my legs to go numb. Long enough to imagine 1,000 stories, Babushka laundering money for smugglers, or blackmailing some faceless bureaucrat who paid her in cash to keep her mouth shut. Or maybe it was simpler, maybe she'd hoarded every spare ruble for decades, so terrified of poverty that she'd rather die pretending to be poor than risk losing it to a bank she didn't trust. When I finally climbed down and locked the attic behind me, the bundle was still in the suitcase. Untouched. But a crack had opened inside me, a thin, jagged line where my loyalty ended and my desperation began. I wish I could say I slept soundly when I got home. I wish I could say I felt noble for leaving the money alone. But the truth is, when I lay in bed, I didn't think about my grandmother's warning. I thought about the rent notice on my fridge. And I thought about how easy it would be, next time, to take just a little. After all, it wasn't like she could stop me now. I wish I could tell you I held out. That I spent the next week bravely ignoring the suitcase, paying my rent with honest money I didn't have, nobly refusing to crack open Babushka's coffin-shaped secret. But I'd be lying, and you already know I'm not half the saint my grandmother tried to pretend she was. 3 days after my midnight attic pilgrimage, my landlord knocked on my door. He didn't even pretend to care that I was half asleep and wearing a stained t-shirt that said "World's Okayest Copywriter." He just stood there in his puffy jacket, breathing through his nose like he was practicing patience for a better life. "Anya," he said, looking over my shoulder into my tiny hallway, as if he might spot stacks of rubles lying around. "It's the 5th. You promised last month there wouldn't be another delay." "I know. I'm waiting on a client payment. It should clear this week." I winced at my own voice, brittle, unconvincing. He sighed, like he'd been rehearsing it in the elevator. "You're a good tenant. But I can't keep covering you. End of the week. Or you find somewhere else." "Somewhere else? Like what? Babushka's empty apartment?" I nearly laughed. "I'd have to sell it first. And selling it would mean telling my mother, and she'd ask questions I didn't want to answer." So when the door closed, I stood there, forehead pressed to the cheap wood, heartbeat knocking like a guilty fist. I wanted to hate the landlord for making me feel like trash. But the truth was, the only person I hated more than him was me, and the dead old woman whose secret had turned my backbone to mush. That night, I didn't even pretend to resist. I drove to her place again, the steering wheel cold under my hands, the whole way there my mind humming with excuses. "It's just rent. Just this once. I'll put it back when I can." She wouldn't want me on the street. She wouldn't want me to starve. The words she wouldn't want looped in my head until they lost all shape. What did she want, anyway? She didn't want to be asked. She didn't want it spent. She didn't want it spoken of. And yet she'd hidden it in the attic, not buried it, not burned it, not donated it to a church or some charity she pretended to care about when she felt guilty. If she really didn't want me to have it, why leave it where I could find it? I climbed the attic ladder like a burglar. When I cracked the suitcase open this time, my hands didn't tremble. I didn't hesitate. I took one bundle, slipped it into my purse. Just 10,000. Just to plug the hole in my life long enough to pretend I had my act together. When I got home, I hid the bundle in my sock drawer like some teenager stashing cigarettes. I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the word thief flickering behind my eyes like a broken sign. In the morning, I paid the landlord in cash. He didn't ask questions, just took it, eyes darting from the envelope to my face, probably wondering what line of work I'd stumbled into overnight. He didn't care enough to say it out loud. When the door shut behind him, I stood there in my silent apartment, fighting the urge to laugh or cry. Because here's the thing, it worked. The weight was gone. The notice on my fridge was irrelevant. For the first time in months, I wasn't one broken invoice away from disaster. So, naturally, that's when the nightmares started. Babushka, sitting in her kitchen chair, except it wasn't her old kitchen. It was mine. Her cloudy eyes fixed on me like milky marbles. Her mouth moved, but her lips were stitched shut with black thread. Every night, the same dream, me, standing over her with the open suitcase in my arms, spilling money onto the floor like rotten petals. She'd watch me in silence, her needle-thin finger tapping out some message on the table. I always woke up before I could figure it out. I tried to tell myself it was just guilt. Normal, healthy guilt. Except guilt wasn't the only thing gnawing at me. I started seeing things. Or maybe noticing them. I'd walk to my car after work and swear someone was standing just out of the streetlight's reach. A man smoking, watching. Maybe nothing. Maybe just my frayed nerves. One night, I came home late, copywriting gig, last-minute edits for a client who thought urgency made her special, and found my front door ajar. Just a crack, but enough to send my pulse hammering into my gums. Inside, everything looked the same. No muddy footprints, no broken vases. Just my life, stale and small, exactly how I'd left it. Except the sock drawer was open. My stash was still there, but the bundle was untied, the bills scattered like a silent accusation. I don't know what scared me more, that someone might have broken in, or that maybe no one had. Maybe I'd done it myself, half asleep, half crazy. The next morning, Katya caught me at our usual coffee spot. She took one look at me, hollow-eyed, my hands jittery from too much cheap caffeine, and didn't even bother with a greeting. "You took it, didn't you?" she said, cutting straight through my half-hearted smile. "What?" I lied. "The money. You spent it. Or you're spending it. Look at you. You're practically vibrating. You're scared shitless." I wanted to deny it. But instead I just whispered, just a little. "Rent." Katya's laugh was sharp enough to cut bread. "Congratulations. You're laundering your dead grandma's mafia money to keep your landlord off your back. Anya, this is insane. What if it's dirty? What if someone knows? What if it's not just yours anymore?" I didn't have a choice, I snapped. Louder than I meant to. People looked. I didn't care. She left it for me. She just didn't have the guts to say so. Katya leaned in, her eyes softening. Or maybe she left it as a test. "And you failed." I wanted to slap her. Or hug her. Or scream that she didn't know anything, none of us did. Not about my grandmother. Not about where that suitcase came from. But the worst part was, she was right. I'd crossed the line once. And I knew, deep down, under the guilt and the fear and the hunger, that I'd cross it again. Because the suitcase was still there. And so was I. I used to think my grandmother's apartment was small, 2 cramped rooms, 1 drafty attic. Now it feels like a cathedral, echoing with secrets and my own stupidity. Every time I climb those stairs, I swear the walls shrink away from me, disgusted by what I've become. After that night with the open front door, I told myself never again. I'd taken my share, my one-time sin. But you know how it goes. One taste of stolen sugar and suddenly every part of you itches for another. A week later, my boss called me into his office. He didn't bother pretending it was about work. No, he sat there behind his cheap particle board desk, tapping his pen like a firing squad drummer. "We're letting you go, Anya. Nothing personal. Restructuring. Nothing personal. Of course not. Nothing ever is when you're disposable." I packed my things in a cardboard box, that cliché you see in movies, the one with the sad houseplant and the single-framed photo that makes you look more human than you really are. I didn't even have the plant. Just a mug that said big ideas, small budget and some stale tea bags. I walked out into the hallway, past Katya, who caught my wrist before I could escape. "Don't do it again," she whispered. Her eyes darted to the exit, like she half expected Babushka's ghost to materialize and drag me back by the hair. "Don't touch it again, Anya. Burn it if you have to." I nodded. Liar. That night, I found myself back in the attic. I didn't even feel guilty about the ladder creaking under my feet this time. Didn't flinch when the suitcase snapped open. Didn't read the letter again. I knew every word by heart now, each syllable carved into my bones like a threat. I told myself this was it, last time, last bundle, just enough to float me until I found another job. That's how it starts, right? Just one more. Addicts, thieves, lonely girls with sticky fingers and no backbone, we all hum the same pathetic lullaby. This time, though, something was different. I reached under the lowest layer of cash, looking for a sturdy bundle, and my fingers scraped against something hard. A corner. Cardboard. A box? My pulse stuttered. I dug deeper, pushing the money aside like stale leaves, until I unearthed a small tin, an old cookie tin, the kind babushka used to hoard sewing needles and bits of string. Only this one was heavier than string and sharper than needles. I pried it open with a grunt. Inside, Polaroids. Black and white. Faded. Grainy like bad dreams. I held the first one up to the attic's single bare bulb, a man, smoking a cigarette, leaning against a car that looked older than my mother. Another shot, same man, same coat, but now standing beside my grandmother. She's young. Stunning, really. All sharp cheekbones and that defiant slant to her mouth that I'd only ever seen in old passport photos. There were more photos. Men I didn't recognize. One of them sprawled on the floor, blood blooming under his head like a black halo. Another photo, babushka again, this time sitting at a table with two uniformed men. KGB? Police? I don't know. No smiles. No warmth. Just secrets pressed flat into glossy rectangles. At the bottom of the tin was another note. Shorter than the first. Harsher. If you found this, you've gone too far. Leave it where you found it. Or they'll come back. They'll come back. Who the hell was they? The men in the photos? Their sons? Grandsons? Some leftover pack of jackals who never forgave my grandmother for, what? Blackmail? Betrayal? I dropped the tin. It hit the attic floor with a dull, final clunk. Suddenly the suitcase didn't look like a miracle anymore, it looked like a loaded gun someone had left on the kitchen table, waiting for me to shoot myself with it. I slammed it shut, nearly catching my fingers in the latch. Backed away so fast I nearly fell off the ladder. I stood there in the cold, dusty attic, my breath fogging the stale air, every hair on my arm standing on end. I thought about the door I'd found ajar. The sock drawer. The man I thought I'd seen smoking near my building. Maybe they weren't hallucinations. Maybe someone was watching. Waiting. Maybe the money wasn't even mine to steal. Maybe it was bait. A leash. A debt I didn't even know I owed. I stumbled down the ladder, heart rattling like a coin in an empty can. I wanted to run, to call the police, my mother, Katya, anyone who might pull me out of this hole I'd dug with my own greedy hands. But what would I say? Hello, officer, my dead grandmother might have been some kind of spy or blackmailer, and I've been laundering her hush money to pay my rent. Yeah, that would go over well. I sat on her couch until sunrise. The suitcase was still up there, locked tight, for now. But I knew I couldn't keep it hidden forever. Someone else already knew it was here. Someone had been inside my home. Touched my life. Left a cold fingerprint on my soul. And maybe, just maybe, they were waiting for me to take one more bundle. One more step over a line I couldn't uncross. By the time the sun clawed its way through the filthy curtains of Babushka's living room, I felt like I'd aged a decade in that scratchy old armchair. I didn't sleep, couldn't. Every creak of the pipes, every shuffle of wind outside the thin windows set my teeth on edge. I half expected the front door to burst open any second, faceless men in black coats pouring in to drag me off to wherever my grandmother's secrets were supposed to stay buried. I wish I could say my first instinct was to do the noble thing, to march down to the nearest police station, suitcase in hand, and spill every rotten detail. But the truth is, I sat there imagining escape instead. Different versions of it. Maybe I could dump the suitcase in the river and pretend I'd never found it. Maybe I could pack it all into the trunk of my dented Lada and drive until the road ran out, Vladivostok, maybe, or the border. Just me, the ghosts, and a million rubles I'd never be able to spend without flinching at every knock on the door. I was still chewing on that fantasy when Katya showed up. She didn't bother knocking. She has a key, she's had it since we were 20 and convinced we'd live together forever in some grimy rented flat, sharing cheap wine and worse boyfriends. She found me exactly as she'd expected, hunched in my grandmother's armchair, the tin of photos spread out like tarot cards on the low table. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask, "Are you okay?" She just crossed her arms over her chest, looked at the Polaroids, and sighed like she'd just discovered I'd tracked mud all over her favorite rug. "So," she said. "How deep are you in?" I barked out a laugh that sounded too sharp in the stale air. Deep enough to wish I'd never opened that attic. She picked up the photo of Babushka with the uniformed men. Turned it over like she expected some helpful clue on the back. There wasn't one. There never is. Anya, you need to burn this. All of it. Money. Pictures. The whole damn suitcase. I almost told her yes. But my mouth wouldn't move that way. What if someone comes for it? I asked instead. What if burning it just pisses them off? What if you spend it and piss them off anyway? She shot back. You think they'd believe you're some innocent granddaughter if they find out you've been peeling bundles out of their hush fund to pay your internet bill? Christ, Anya. She was right. Of course she was right. She always is. That's her curse, not mine. She poured us both stale tea from the old pot on Babushka's stove. We drank it standing up, like two soldiers in an abandoned trench. Finally she asked, what are you going to do? And there it was, the million-ruble question. I thought about Uncle Misha's voice, cracked and ragged, some bones better left buried. I thought about the photos. The man with blood blooming under his head like spilled ink. The letter, they'll come back. I thought about my grandmother, sitting at the same table, probably running her thumb over these same photos, wondering when the past would reach out its claws and yank her back. What was I going to do? The only thing left, really. I'm going to finish this, I said. The words tasted like a lie and the truth at the same time. Katya narrowed her eyes. Meaning? Meaning, I said, I'm going to find out who they are. And then I'm going to give it back. She laughed, one harsh bark of disbelief. Give it back? To whom? The KGB? The mob? Some bureaucrat's rotting son who thinks he owns you now? Do you hear yourself? I did. And it sounded insane. But insanity seemed more honest than pretending I could shove the suitcase back in the attic and keep living like it wasn't rotting my life from the inside out. She stayed with me that whole day. We didn't talk much after that. We just sat there, two girls orbiting a secret we never asked for. When dusk bled through the windows, she stood up, pressed her forehead to mine like we were kids again, and whispered, "Don't be a hero. Heroes die stupid." When she left, I locked the door behind her. Double bolt. Chain. As if that ever stopped anything worth fearing. I dragged the suitcase down from the attic and set it in the middle of the living room floor. It looked smaller now. Less like treasure, more like a coffin for all the parts of me I'd never get back. I opened it one last time. Ran my hands over the bundles. The letter. The tin. The photos. I whispered to Babushka's ghost, not begging forgiveness, not asking permission, just saying it out loud so I could believe I still had some control. I'm ending this. Then I closed the suitcase, locked it, and taped the tin to its lid. A gift. A confession. A promise. Tomorrow, I'll start with Uncle Misha. I'll ask him what he really knows, no more half-truths through nicotine fog. If that doesn't work, I'll knock on doors I shouldn't knock on. I'll find them, whoever they are. I'll drag this curse back where it came from, rub my grandmother's ghost all over their polished floors if I have to. Maybe they'll thank me. Maybe they'll kill me. Either way, I won't sit here rotting like she did, surrounded by secrets and pretending it was virtue. 1,000,000 rubles. Not enough to buy my silence anymore. I always thought my grandmother was poor. Turns out, she was rich in all the ways that don't show up on bank statements, debts you can't repay, sins you inherit like blood type. In the morning, I'll pay hers back. Or die trying. Either way, it ends with me. I always thought that when the truth came, it would arrive like thunder, sudden, loud, impossible to ignore. But the truth is more patient than that. It creeps in through the cracks when you're too tired to hold the door shut any longer. I found Uncle Misha 2 days after I made my promise to Babushka's ghost. He didn't even pretend to be surprised when I showed up at his dingy flat on the edge of the city. He just looked at the suitcase by my feet, then at me, then back at the suitcase again. You should have left it in the attic, Anya. His voice was the same weary scrape of gravel and old regret. I couldn't, I said. You knew I wouldn't. He grunted, a sound that could have been agreement or disgust, I still can't tell which. I made him tea. Weak, like Babushka's. Maybe it was superstition. Or maybe I just wanted her ghost to hear every word we said. Tell me who they are, I said when he finally sat down at his crumb-covered kitchen table. He shrugged, lit a cigarette, let the silence hang just long enough to make me want to scream. Old men with old debts, he said at last. Men who needed favors done when your grandmother was young enough and hungry enough to do them. Men who paid her to stay quiet. She did. And they paid her again when the old favors turned to old threats. Threats? He blew smoke at the stained ceiling. Some secrets don't die when the bodies do. She kept things. Names. Proof. Insurance. He tapped the side of his head with one yellowed finger. Smart girl, you're babushka. Smarter than you, maybe. I ignored the insult. So what happens if I give it back? He laughed, a low, brittle wheeze. Nothing. Or everything. Maybe they take the money. Maybe they bury you next to her for good measure. Depends how nervous they are. Depends how noisy you are. And if I keep it? He leaned forward, his breath stale with smoke and the faint smell of boiled cabbage. Then you live like she did. Door locked. Eyes over your shoulder. Every knock at midnight makes your heart stop. I wanted to scream. Instead, I just stared at my chipped mug of tea. So this is it, I thought. This is the inheritance. Not the money, the fear. I left Uncle Misha sitting there, counting the ghosts only he could see. He didn't say goodbye. I didn't either. That night, I drove to the edge of the city, past the warehouses, past the rotting docks where men like my grandfather used to drink themselves blind on payday. I parked at the riverbank. The suitcase sat heavy in my trunk, humming like a second heart. I dragged it out myself, no ceremony, no final prayer. The wind off the water was sharp enough to make my eyes water. Maybe that's what I'll blame it on later, if anyone asks. I pulled the photos out first, the Polaroids, the tin, the letter that told me what not to do, as if I'd ever had a choice. I ripped the letter into strips, tossed them in one by one. They floated like dead moths before sinking under the dark skin of the river. The cash was harder. Every bundle a piece of my rent, my debt, my cowardice. I thought of how easily I'd taken that first stack, how sweet it felt, how sour it tasted now. One by one, I fed the river my grandmother's secret pension plan. The current swallowed it all without a ripple. No applause. No judgment. When it was done, I stood there with the empty suitcase at my feet. Part of me wanted to keep it, a stupid souvenir. But I knew better. I tossed it in after the rest. Watched it bob once, twice, then tip under like a tired swimmer. I stood there until my fingers went numb. The river kept moving, same as it always had, same as it always will. It didn't care who owed what to whom. Or why. Back at my flat, I found Katia waiting on my stairs. She didn't ask what I'd done. She just looked at my raw, chapped hands and nodded like she'd known all along how this would end. What now? She asked. I wanted to say I don't know. But that was another lie I was too tired to carry. Now I pay my own rent, I said. One ad banner at a time. One honest ruble at a time. She snorted. You? Honest? As honest as I can afford to be. She threw an arm around my shoulders. Her warmth felt real. Solid. The only thing in this whole mess that hadn't tried to trick me. Your babushka would be proud, she said. I wanted to believe it. Maybe I did. When she left, I sat alone in my kitchen, same chair, same cracked mug. No suitcase in the attic. No hush money in my sock drawer. Just me and the echoes of the woman I thought I knew. I always thought my grandmother was poor. Maybe she was. Maybe she wasn't. Maybe money is the smallest kind of wealth we ever inherit. The bigger debts live in the silence. And some days, paying them is the only honest thing left to do.